So the next question is for Dr. Schreib in particular, and is what made you become interested in designing interactive learning experiences to make large computer science courses feel personalized?
Yeah, so I think it largely boils down to the fact that I do love teaching, very, very passionate about that. And I'm really always trying to find ways to teach better. And as you know, I mentioned I took some classes that specifically focused on like pedagogy and what's known as like evidence-backed teaching. So basically, types of practices in teaching that have been studied and shown via research to actually be really effective for learning. And one of the first things that I learned in the process was how important it is that students be really actively engaged in the process of learning, not just kind of sitting there receiving information from like a lecture, although that actually does have a very important use in education as well, but also, getting the experience to actually apply and practice the things that they've learned. And so that kind of drove a lot of the work that, I mentioned I started doing educational research. A lot of the work that I started doing was kind of driven by, well, how can we get that specifically in the context of CS? And I think CS has a lot of really interesting challenges in the past, especially decade or so, because it has blown up so much in terms of the interest in it, which I think is fantastic. But which means that we don't have, these tiny classes of like 10 students that some of the other departments at Rice might have. We're sometimes dealing with like hundreds of students. And so it becomes a real challenge of figuring out how can we still have this kind of interactivity of both student to student as well as student to teacher, as well as a lot of what I do is trying to design like tools that can be a bit interactive and give kind of personalized feedback as students are practicing things that kind of can be akin to what like normally a TA or a professor would do. And so that's been a lot of what I've explored in my research, as well as just, in my role as an educator in general. And I'm happy if anyone has questions at the end to talk about like specifically what types of tools I build, but that's generally what I do.
Yeah, I know that there has been an increased interest in computer science over the past few years. So as a director of undergraduate studies in the CS department, your interest will certainly benefit Rice students to make their learning experience more enjoyable. And then for Dr. Yao, how did you become fascinated with computational biology?
Yeah, so I think I kind of alluded to this a little bit already before. I was kind of, I've been always very interested in biology in general. I think generally I'd say I was always very interested in a lot of the sciences growing up, or just generally learning about how things work. And biology had this particular attraction to me. Well, kind of, I mentioned already in college, I was very interested in econ as well, and I still am. But in a way, kind of, I had this realization, econ is a social science. The best you do is you're modeling people are erratic, even though you have to assume that they're irrational, and then like you kind of go with the model, and in the optimal case, kind of you influence policy, they change how the economy works, or they implement new rules, and then your models are always breaking. So I was like, I think biology is very complicated, but it kind of had this attraction to me, at least at the time, for being kind of, it's more like you're solving a puzzle. It's like biology doesn't care what we think about it, but we can like kind of slice and dice and try to observe it from multiple angles. And of course, I'm really kind of, one of the things that really motivates me are like kind of the potential health implications of better understanding biology, right? It's like, you know, we're kind of constantly dealing with kind of human health kind of related problems, questions. And a lot of them come from, biology gone wrong a little bit, but then biology is also so complex and intricate. It's and we still understand very little. And I think we're also at this time where computing has advanced so much, and there's so many new kind of techniques to collect data, so things can be moving very quickly. So I think, again, it kind of combines several of my interests, I have to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree that computational biology is a fascinating field, and it can like help cure cancer and other diseases in the future. And Alice will be asking the next few questions.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that nowadays a lot of science has like a computational field version, and I guess it bubbles down to whether you want to do like real lab work or you can do like a lot of computational testing. Because I know some people I've been working with, like I have a friend doing like a computational biology project, and I think it's a really cool field. So the next question is just what is your proudest achievement that you'd like to share with us? Or either for both of you guys, yeah.
Okay, I guess yeah, so I was like, yeah, so I guess I have to say though, I think in a work setting, I'm not sure I would have like a it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I wouldn't say like I have like a single proudest achievement per se. I think I'm more proud of like kind of non-work related things probably more. I think work related things, it's just like there's always so many ups and downs. Actually, I feel like more often you're just dealing with like things gone wrong or trying to like kind of, and there's like always kind of small wins along the way. It's kind of this winding path. So for me personally, I would say that like yeah, I don't really have like a particular kind of proudest achievement per se.
Yeah, that one's a little tricky for me too. I think that, because I am so focused on teaching, there's not a lot of like big moments in teaching. It's kind of made up of all these small moments across the day-to-day basis. Because certainly if I point back to like my PhD, I can say, oh, I'm proud that I got this paper published or that paper published, although there isn't like, one that stands out to me. But nowadays, I think probably, it's just the little moments of like, I leave the class feeling like, wow, like that was a good lesson today. I feel like the students learned something and I feel like I had an impact. And, those little moments kind of add up. I think if I were to point to something like slightly bigger, kind of the behind the scenes work of developing courses, I think is something that I've been very proud of because I had no idea when I started this job how much work goes into putting together an entire course, all of the lectures and the assignments and, everything that goes down with that. So I think, that's something where there is kind of more of like an end product of looking back on the different courses that I've built and being quite proud of those. But yeah, I think it's a continuing basis of small things that I'm proud of.
Wow, it's really inspiring. I think that makes sense for like your careers. Like it's more like culminating as like a big success at the end when you like finish or what you're doing, and then rather than like a huge achievement in the middle, it's just like successes throughout. So, so what are some unique challenges of pursuing a career in academic institutions then? And what inspired you to keep going when you faced challenges?
Okay, so I think for me, one of the most unique challenges of kind of working in an academic environment is that so it's also one of the things that really attracts me to academic like life, it kind of just to say on the front end, that it's highly unstructured in the sense that like yes, there are things like, when you're teaching a class, it's actually one of the things that's more structured. You have like a day, you have a lecture, and you have like homeworks that you have to release. So it's like you're creating structure for your students and yourself. But usually, like there's a lot of freedom, that's why it's really like a huge advantage, but also a huge challenge because it's not like we like are like kind of there's no boss kind of you don't have like a time card that you're checking in and out. It's very kind of self-driven a little bit more, like like what the projects you want to work on, the time frame you want to work on them. Like as a faculty working more on research, you have to submit grants, like ask for funding and like kind of propose new projects. But a lot of these places, yeah, so there are deadlines for some of these opportunities, but then there are several. You can always say, okay, I'll do the next one, right? Like, or like you could decide whether or not to apply to a particular one. So there's a lot of, I think, unique challenges that come with like kind of this just like it's not very structured. And in terms of kind of what inspires, so that's why it's like not like a necessarily like a specific looming challenge. It's this kind of, it's like life and work can be very, very unstructured. I think, of course, like a lot of the challenges come from also the fact that, as like kind of a research academic, you do have to face like kind of getting rejections, like, from grant funding proposals or papers. And this is like, I think in terms of what inspires me to continue on or like kind of work on things, it's like I do have like a group of graduate students that I work with. And I think it's like, I need to take care of them. I need to help them grow as kind of researchers, right? And it's like, I need to create structure. So I think again, it's like the same thing with class. It's like it could be it can be as unstructured as almost probably you want, other than the fact that you have a scheduled meeting time. But in order to kind of help your students better or like kind of do better research, you do need to then kind of figure out kind of your own deadlines and like kind of yeah, so things like that.
Yeah, I would definitely second all of that. That was definitely the first thing that came to mind for me as well. Because, you know, even on the teaching side more, you know, I do talk to the chair about like what classes I'm going to teach in a particular semester, but nobody is looking over my shoulder saying like, this is the exact material you need to cover, or this is how you need to teach it, or how you should structure things. Like that's all decisions that I'm making. And again, like Vicky, I love this. Like this is one of the reasons that I like this job is I feel like I am my own boss and I have all of this creative freedom with how I do different things. But it does mean that ultimately I'm the one who needs to like motivate myself and hold myself accountable and, you know, like decide how much time I'm going to expend on different things and where, because that is also, I think, another challenge of the job is that it's a job where you don't have very like fixed responsibilities per se, in the sense that, you know, even if I'm more focused on teaching, like I have a lot of decisions to make in terms of like, you know, how much do I want to improve and change and modify my courses from year to year? You know, do I want to try these new experimental things? Do I want to build new tools for my classes or not? And then, you know, there's really no cutoff point. Like you can infinitely improve your classes in the same way that, you know, I'm sure with research, you know, you can be more hands-on with how you're working with your students or more hands-off. You can be taking on more projects or fewer, you know, there's just really no ending point. And so for me, like, I think this kind of figuring out where is the boundary, because I do tend to be a perfectionist and I want to do it all. You know, I want to constantly be improving my classes. I want to constantly be, you know, providing more support to my students and things like that. But that can be hard. And I have started, you know, dabbling in a little bit more research again recently. After the first couple of years on the job, I was really very focused on building classes. And that as well has been this challenging balance of how much support do I provide to my students versus, you know, letting them do things a little bit more independently. I think there's also the flexibility of kind of the time schedule, in the sense that, you know, we basically just have to be present for when our scheduled class times are on campus, you know, and obviously, you know, that doesn't mean that we should only be present around those times because there are other meetings and things like that that need to come up, but there isn't really a set, okay, you're working 9 to 5, you know, Monday through Friday. But the downside of that, and I don't know if y'all have heard similar things to industry where, for example, like companies that give unlimited vacation day policies, like people actually typically take fewer days of vacation at those companies than at ones that have like a fixed number. And it's because when you have all this flexibility, sometimes you're like almost reluctant to like take it, right? And so it can be very hard for me to even, you know, take time off that is time that people in normal jobs might take off, right? So like sometimes I'm working nights and weekends and things like that. And so setting those boundaries can be, I think, quite difficult as well, just because of the fact that the work can kind of grow. I think also on the teaching side, there can be a lot of somewhat emotional labor, I guess would be like the word that people usually use for it, where, you know, you have students coming to you with difficult situations who are struggling and things like that. And, you know, there can be a lot of, you know, just difficult situations to deal with, which I do like to be there to support my students, but I'm a bit introverted myself. And so sometimes this can just be like draining at the end of the day of spending a lot of time just being, you know, giving that support to people. And sometimes it's hard to like make sure that I'm setting appropriate boundaries in that regard. But ultimately, I genuinely love my job. I think it's a great job. And I think, you know, that is really kind of what motivates me, is that I think all of these are, you know, worthy things to do with my time. And part of, I think, why it's so hard to set boundaries is because I do actually genuinely enjoy my work.
Well, I really enjoyed hearing that. I think everything you guys mentioned is what sets research apart from typical fields of study. And all of our listeners should to pay attention and consider if that's what you really want when you go into a field that's so unstructured and focused on making deadlines yourself. Now, do you either of you guys have advice for your younger self, or is there anything you change in your path to get to where you are now?
Okay, so I guess, you know, the advice is not necessarily to my younger self. I already know the advice I should take, like kind of right now. It's actually a little bit related to what Rebecca was alluding to. I think like things can always get better. Those perfectionist tendencies, I think, are really, really hard to combat. And I think that like basically it's kind of cliche, but like the being okay with failure and not being so hard on yourself is, I think, like just difficult where I think forever probably. And so I think that, yeah, so that would be my general kind of, which I feel like is totally the advice I need most right now. If there's something that I would change, I actually, you know, I think I mentioned, like, I took this very winding path where I explored a bunch of different things. I ended up where I am now. I actually am not sure I would change the path per se, because I think that, I don't know, it's like, I think we talked about like a little bit that you know, it almost feels like it's inefficient to like kind of come to here if I kind of, you know, knew that I wanted to do this in the end. But at the same time, part of the learning experience is this exploratory nature. So I think that recently I've been kind of, you know, some researchers talk about how, like, especially when you're doing research, like, it's always in retrospect, you're like, oh, this is obvious, this is the right way to do it. But really the kind of fun or kind of really challenging and frustrating thing about research is in the middle, you know, know your beginning point, and in the middle, you're in this kind of cloud of wandering that's very exploratory. But it's like through that process that you learn and kind of develop understanding, and then, you know, try to discover something new, right? So I would say that, you know, I think that, yeah, I am okay with the path I took.
I actually love that you said that, because I sometimes feel like my path was like too laser focused. So like, I sometimes wish that I did a little more explain, because I went into undergrad, you know, not knowing I wanted to do computer science, but it was, you know, up there in consideration, and basically decided after my freshman year, and like didn't really look back. And I have no doubts that it was the correct field for me, but I definitely do, if I look back on my undergraduate experience, wish that I'd like been less focused on just like, let me do all of my CS coursework and all of my CS research and all of my CS TAing, and maybe branched out a little bit more. You know, Rice has requirements for undergrads. They're called distribution requirements that do require that you like take courses in other fields. But I basically did the bare minimum to like check those off. And then I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to like do my CS classes, right? And so when I give advice to my students now, you know, I tell them like, explore, take advantage of this. Like, there's not really a lot of opportunities similar in the future to be able to try out all of these different fields and to explore them. Now, that said, in my defense, and in the defense of many other students who I think fall into the same challenge, you know, it can be hard to fit in that exploration, because I know, like, certainly in my experience, my CS coursework took a ton of time. You know, I was very busy just with doing that. Although I guess, you know, that kind of branches me off to another potential piece of advice I give myself, which is, you know, again, be less perfectionistic, and, you know, recognize that like maybe sometimes it would have been better, you know, or okay, you know, to have spent a little bit more time on other things, not even just other academic things, but, you know, just making sure that I'm taking care of my mental health and my physical health and things like that, rather than being like super laser focused on like doing the best as possible in all of my courses. I think probably if I had taken that advice, I still would have gotten into grad school. I still would have ended up being a professor at the end of the day. Maybe my GPA would have been just like a smidge lower, but I maybe would have been happier and like had like a more well-rounded life. Not to say that I was unhappy, just to be clear, but there are definitely times where I feel like it was all, you know, work all the time, and that's probably not the best.
I think it's great that you guys came from like different backgrounds coming into research, and it was good to hear two different perspectives on, you know, either exploring as you get there or just being focused, and how it can make you just as successful but either way. And I think what you were just talking about is a good segue into the next question, which is just how do you strike a balance between your professional and personal lives?
Okay, yeah, so work in progress. I guess, oh, actually, yeah, Rebecca, do you want to go first? We could switch our, okay.
I mean, I can, but...
Yeah, so definitely like a work in progress still. I think one of the difficult things I think we mentioned earlier is how unstructured things are, right? So that, I think Rebecca already alluded to this, it's very, in a way, it's like, because you're kind of your own boss and there are no mandated hours other than kind of appearing for your class times. So basically you can choose when you work, but that also means you can choose to work kind of a lot of the time. And so I think, again, it's like, yeah, so advice in general, kind of connecting the two things is like kind of, you know, some things might, a lot of little things can appear very urgent, or like kind of like you need to do them, but the work never ends. The to-do list always grows. And so I think this is, for me, definitely still like a work in progress, how to kind of carve out boundaries between professional and personal life.
Definitely same here. I think probably on the whole, academics are probably a little bit worse about setting boundaries between their work and personal life than, you know, most traditional careers. I think, you know, part of that is coming from the nature of the job and the flexibility and the structure. I will say, you know, I think part of it is also coming from the fact that we tend to be very passionate about our work. So like, I really do love my work and probably wouldn't spend as much time working if I didn't, you know, find it to be very meaningful. But yeah, I struggle for sure. Like I look back, you know, on, you know, I'm 4 years into the job. That's as far, so I'm not like super far in, but I look back on the past 4 years and I definitely feel like there were places where I could have been less perfectionistic and maybe had a little bit more free time, but I think I'm getting better. And so the advice, I guess, are the things that I've learned along the way in terms of improving things is like, first of all, like recognizing that like the little pieces of time do actually matter. So for example, I'm actually really lucky that my husband also works at Rice. So we carpool together to campus. And I used to like spend that time because he drives. I used to spend the time like on my phone doing emails, like getting started for the day, right? And so like over time, I was like, you know what, this isn't good. Like this is like time that we can spend together, just like talking about what we have planned for the day and things like that. And so kind of like recognizing that there's little moments here and there where I can put the work away, be more present, like actually in my life. I think that's really important. I think, emails does make that very hard, right? Because emails happen round the clock versus a lot of other things. So that's one of the things I struggle most, I think, is putting the phone away in that regard. I think also like I've learned to actually schedule time for like my hobbies and also like downtime. Not like I'm actually putting it on my calendar, but I have kind of general times of the day that I really try to protect. So for example, I like to exercise, I run, I lift, things like that. I am not a morning workout person. I'm just not a morning person in general. But I also find that the evening is a hard time for me because by then I'm tired. So afternoons is when I like to work out, which happens to be during the normal workday. But because we have this flexibility, I actually usually protect between about 3:30 and 5 p.m. And I don't schedule meetings during that time because that is the time that I like to work out. And I know that, I will get my work done at other times of day, even if that means in the evening. I would prefer that because in the evening, I'm not going to do my workout. And so, I've learned that if I set aside time for these things and I really kind of guard it, even if on a given day I decide, you know what, I'm not going to run today, I would actually like to do a little bit more work. That's okay. But I have the time available to myself. And similarly, at the end of the evening, I really, really hate working right up until bedtime and then like waking up the next day and working some more. I find that to be quite depressing. And I did a lot of that in my first year on the job because I just felt like there was so much I had to do all the time. But I've kind of realized that if I, just dedicate at least an hour at the end of the night to, reading a book or watching TV or just something that allows me to relax, like I am much happier. And I think that probably actually makes me better at my job. So just little things here and there, and I'm continuing to work on it and improve. I'm definitely not a role model, I think, in terms of work-life balance.
That was some great advice. I feel like it's probably hard to draw a line between professional and personal life if what you're working on is something you genuinely enjoy, because I guess I feel like it kind of becomes part of your personal life because you enjoy doing it a lot. But anyway, the next questions, I think, Caroline, are you ready?
So the next few questions are more like, I guess, advice focused on like the audience. So what makes a student a good candidate for the computer science undergraduate program at Rice?
The one thing I will say is that, Rice does admissions holistically. There are some universities where you apply like to the School of Computer Science. Carnegie Mellon, for example, does that. At Rice, it's with the exception of, I think, actually music and architecture, they're outliers. In general, students just apply to Rice. So from kind of an admissions standpoint, it's more about just being a strong candidate to be admitted to Rice in general. So I think, that's kind of the typical thing that really any, highly ranked institution, competitive institution is looking at in terms of, strong academic potential, but probably also balanced with, someone who is well-rounded. Because I think Rice, like many institutions, again, I'm not an admissions officer, so I'm not speaking from their perspective, but my impression is that they like their students to be well-rounded, to be people who are going to, contribute to the Rice community in whatever way that might be. For some people that might be athletics, for some people it might be extracurriculars, for some it might be the TAing and research. But I think they like to see that there is some kind of passion there outside of like just studying all the time, because I think that makes it, an interesting and vibrant community. In terms of like once you're here and succeeding in computer science specifically, I will say that our undergraduate curriculum does not require or expect any prior program experience, although I think computer science at the high school level has become a lot more common in terms of being offered. So like we used to see that like a lot of people would come in with no prior experience. Now more people are coming in with experience. So I'm sure that that probably does have some benefits, but it's like by no means required. And I think there are a lot of like, different skills and characteristics that are helpful in terms of succeeding in the field, but I think that might blur into the next question a little bit, so I might wait on that.
Yeah, I think, well, Rebecca's the expert on the undergraduate experience in computer science, undergraduate education in general. But yeah, I would say that, like, yeah, so I think there's some kind of general sense that I feel like, well, people, I think I actually would encourage everyone to kind of explore and kind of try computer science since it's become so ubiquitous. But I think deciding whether or not to major in it is like an interesting, different question. Just because I think that there are a lot of pressures, I feel like, in a way, pushing people to major in computer science sometimes when they actually might not actually necessarily fit or prefer computer science, just because, you know, job prospects, sometimes probably parents, or I don't know, like other things. And so there's like, I think some sense that, like, I think it's, well, in general, I would say choosing any major, I think talking to students, like, and being successful in it, there's like a difference between being successful and then being happily successful. And I think there is like the people who are very good candidates are people who kind of are curious either about computers or using computers to do something. And I think versus say getting a high paying job. And I think that there's like I think that the ones who are interested in either just the area of computer science or using computer science to study something else, I think these ones usually will get a lot more out of the program. You know, of course, like, you know, there are people who might not care so much about computer science and will still also learn a lot in our kind of undergraduate program. But I think in terms of a good candidate, it's somebody who would get the most out of it and have an enjoyable time. I feel like in my kind of interactions with people, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree that like being like actually happy rather than like forced to like go into computer science is a really like important part. And as Dr. Schreib kind of led to the next question is, what do you think are the most important characteristics for someone to have a successful career in the field of computer science?
I think one of the most important skills definitely is going to be problem solving skills. You are solving problems constantly in computer science. That is basically what any field in engineering does, at least in, you know, at Rice, computer science is housed under the School of Engineering. I think different places are different in that regard, but I consider it to be engineering because of the fact that it is this really applied use of, you know, math and science in order to solve problems. And so being able to kind of methodically break down a problem and build up a solution to it, I think that's a really important skill. I think there's also a lot of creativity in the field though. So I always tell people that that's one of the things I like best about it, is that it balances this kind of very analytical reasoning with this more creativity of there's always going to be many different ways to solve the same problem. And so, you know, brainstorming what the different ways are, and then kind of going through this critical thinking process of being able to identify like which of those is actually going to be the best solution for a given problem, I think are really important skills as well. I think there's a lot of aspects of recognizing patterns and being able to kind of like formalize those patterns. That's an important part of the field because we are trying to, you know, automate things, and that requires that kind of level of thinking as well. And then I think I'd also say that, you know, this is not really computer science specific, but I think it's worth mentioning because I think it's undervalued sometimes in STEM fields, is the importance of, you know, kind of more professional skills like communication, collaboration, and things like that. I think sometimes people think, you know, with a field like computer science, oh, I can just kind of go off on my own and write code. But it really is inherently a very collaborative field. Like the larger the problem you're trying to solve, the more people you're going to need to be working together to tackle that. And so being able to work well with others, as well as being able to like communicate technical ideas to others, whether that be your collaborators or like, you know, key stakeholders who might not be coming from a technical background, but, you know, are maybe going to be using your product, I think are all very, very important skills.
Yeah, so I think I often give this analogy. I think for computer science, it's like, it's kind of the field that we developed to be closest to like magic, where basically you just like say or stuff or type things and then stuff happens, right? And I think that like the kind of, just to add on, I think like I agree with all of what Rebecca said, is that like the problem sometimes that I also observe now is that we've actually, computer science has grown so far as a field that it is kind of so magical that it's complicated as a person starting to learn computer science to like kind of be able to systematically parse through and be like, kind of look under the hood and understand where the magic comes from, and like kind of understand all of the engineering that kind of goes into making this happen, and then becoming a part of that. So one example is like, we have all of these, great tools now, ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, all of these things that help people actually, code faster, code more efficiently, and kind of, and there's tons of resources also online to get kind of basically the answer to almost any coding question. But the kind of trade-off there happens where, like, if you kind of overly rely on these kinds of already kind of magical resources that were developed through people who actually built this up kind of slowly, then I think you lose the kind of ability to kind of then to kind of build up these things kind of yourself, right? And I think that the other kind of trend that I feel like I'm observing is that it's important to kind of think not in the short term in terms of like kind of, a single problem, especially in the school setting, right? To like want to really learn kind of how things work under the hood, and actually want to kind of develop these skill sets versus just solving a homework assignment. Because, when we have homework assignments, the goal is really not to solve the homework assignment. The goal is really to learn kind of important skills or ways of thinking like a computer scientist that will allow you to build more and more kind of cool projects kind of later on.
Oh yeah, I definitely think those are important characteristics, and like with computer science, errors are gonna happen, and I think with problem solving and like collaboration, those are like you can produce that magic with it. And the last question is, do you have any advice or resources to share with STEM and Rose members?
So I think actually I'd like to start by reiterating something that Vicky said earlier when she was talking about, being a good candidate for CS. I actually didn't even approach the question in that way, but it was something that I do say often to students is do make sure to find, what you love and do that, right? Don't just aim for the thing that is the most high paying or the thing that is the most prestigious. I actually learned that, was prestigious well myself when I kind of made that transition from aiming for tenure track to aiming for teaching track. People generally consider tenure track as being like the pinnacle of academic success, but for me it wasn't, right? It wasn't the right fit, and it wasn't what I aimed for, and I had to recognize that like maybe going for like the most prestigious thing is not the best fit for me or what will make me the most happy. And similarly, I probably could be making more money in industry. Actually, I would say that I definitely could be making more money in industry, but like I'm much happier where I'm at. So I think that is absolutely something that I would tell anyone, whether they're thinking about computer science or they're just exploring all of their options, is to look for what's going to make you happy. I think other general pieces of advice, if you are going to go into well, really in any field, yeah. I think it's just really important to find like a strong support network along the way of whatever path you're taking. So I definitely had a lot of mentors in undergrad that helped me to kind of figure out where I wanted to go. I was originally going to say if you're going into research specifically, because I think research, it's very easy to get isolated. And so it's really important to have a support network, both of peers as well as like mentors who are like further along in their career than you. But I also think that that's really true of any job, of trying to, find a community that you can, vent to if things are going rough, but also, mentors who you can kind of learn from and get advice from as you progress through your career. I think that's super important. I think Vicky talked a little bit earlier about the fact that there can be a lot of failure in research, but I think that also kind of applies to the undergraduate experience. Not in that people always come in and like fail, but they might come in and struggle, right? Because I think, college can be a rough transition. And so just being prepared for that and recognizing that it is a transition and it's challenging, and that's okay because that's a learning experience, and you will grow as a result of that. I think that's some of my initial advice. I probably have other advice I could give as well, but it's a very broad question.
Yeah, I think I want to also add to kind of what Rebecca said a little bit. I think that the way that kind of high school education and then even later on a lot of things are structured is it kind of pigeonholes people into thinking it's like some zero-sum game that's like the super competitive thing. Like I think in high school it's like, people are like, oh, you're competing for some spots in like a university. And then like later on, I think there's like this very strong competition mindset. It's like, you know, you're building up your resumes and you're competing to get your class ranks and things like this. And I think that it actually doesn't lend itself as well sometimes to kind of paving the way for long-term success. So I think Rebecca said, right, I think that kind of a mindset is not as good for helping build like a very strong support network, which actually then I think it's like a trick to think that everything is such a zero-sum game and it's this competition, when actually you can kind of, you know, as like a group succeed together, right? And like kind of help each other. Like, you know, when people like are helping each other on their homeworks, it's not like kind of you know, or like help each other study and things like this. It's not like kind of diminishing yourself in any way. And in fact, I think it actually helps you become a stronger student and kind of learn better. And so I think that would be kind of my main advice in general. Like, I think going into school, especially, I think that's one of the things I realized. I think as high school is becoming more and more competitive, like a transition in that mindset can sometimes be a little bit hard.
I can definitely relate to the competitive high school setting. And I think mentors and having a support network are definitely important in getting through like the highs and lows of it. And Alice will be asking a few questions from chat.
Yeah, we've got a question in the chat. Going back to when Dr. Yao, you were mentioning ChatGPT, what are your views on AI? And do you think it will lead to the elimination of jobs in the field of computer science? I guess for both of you guys.
Yeah, so I would say I don't think so the elimination of jobs is kind of this very kind of like swapping in and out, right? I think that with AI, I think a lot of fields, including computer science, will kind of more evolve and adapt. It's like, I think whenever you get new tools and new technologies, like in a way, yes, there's certain kind of job tasks that probably get eliminated or become much more efficient. So you need to spend less time on them. But that doesn't, you know, you still like, I mean, people are finding AI is not perfect, right? It's like, I think for ChatGPT, it's kind of amusing where people are finding like you need to kind of give it different prompts, word things slightly differently, you get different things. And so there are new jobs coming out, prompt engineers, like, you know, like this is like, who would have thought you would have a job where you're just like formulating different prompts to ChatGPT, right? So it's like, I think elimination of jobs feels kind of more dire sounding. I do think that there's kind of be new jobs that are evolving and kind of, well, so this kind of leads to kind of that other point I was making about when you're learning computer science, it's actually good not to be over reliant, I think, in general on, say, ChatGPT, because if you're just going to be kind of copying what ChatGPT tells you, I think you could think forward that like, then this is not as kind of a unique contribution that you're giving, right? But at the end of the day, ChatGPT is built by kind of computer scientists. There's a lot of infrastructure around it that needs to be kind of maintained by kind of you know, computer scientists or kind of other engineers or other fields. And there's also all these new questions kind of coming up, you know, in terms of, you know, AI ethics and all of these things. So actually, I think what in general, I think is that new technology will kind of just change the landscape of things. So, you know, traditional jobs can change, morph, and new jobs can appear, and there are new questions that inherently kind of arise whenever you have some kind of new kind of technology like this.
I would second all of that. But the one little thing that I would just add is that I think, you know, ChatGPT, at least currently, it's good at boilerplate stuff, which is great because there's always boilerplate stuff to be done. And that part is boring to do, right? But as you get to the more interesting and challenging and specialized, you know, to the particular task that you're trying to do problems, like it's not going to be able to just pull that out of nowhere, right? If you're doing something that's new, that hasn't been done a billion times before, that's interesting and hard and not something that I think, you know, computer scientists can be replaced.
Well, also even to add to that, we have to kind of note that, of course, ChatGPT can also fail at some things that like, you know, I think you've kind of probably seen like, you know, ChatGPT can't do arithmetic or whatever, right? So I think there's like actually just a caveat, like also to clarify, yes, it's like they're good at certain types of boilerplate tasks, and there are certain things that like elementary school kids can do that ChatGPT cannot do. So I think we could see that
True.
there's like a lot of there's like a big range there.
Yeah, definitely. I think I had it try to play like a simple math game with me once, and it was just unable to do that. But another question in the chat is, were either of you patronized for being a woman in this field, or faced any struggles that might have been attributed to that?
I've had a good experience on the whole, I would say. I don't know how much of that is just I got lucky in the people that I interacted with. You know, I certainly can point to like little individual comments where like I definitely remember this stuck with me one time when someone was like, oh, you must have gotten that job because you're a woman, like, you know, and I was like, whoa, like, no, I got that job because I'm good at what I do. Not this job, to be clear. This was like an undergraduate research experience that I got. This was like years ago. So nobody has told me that about my current job. I think I'm very good at my current job and that nobody would be able to legitimately tell me that. I also deserved the job back then too, though. So yes, I have experienced like, you know, small comments like that where, you know, people are maybe like assuming, you know, that maybe there's some like affirmative action working in my favor and not that like I have earned the things that I've had. I've also kind of had, you know, I actually really think I have had much of the opposite, where I've had people, you know, like assume that I would be like less good at computer science because I'm a woman. But I think I am lucky maybe in that regard, because I do think I sometimes see situations, you know, a lot of my classes have collaboration where, you know, students are working in teams during class. And I think it does happen from time to time where you might have certain men that might, you know, be a little bit more disparaging or maybe a little more quick to, you know, reject the ideas of some of the women. But on the whole, I really don't think that's coming from the vast majority of people. I think the vast majority of people like this has been an inclusive field in my experience. I don't know. Do you have the similar experience, Vicky?
I think it's a little bit complicated. I do think that like in general, things that are, I would say, getting better and people are aware of certain problems, I think, with kind of just, you know, I think the composition of the field, of course, is still very, very kind of, it is kind of more tilted with kind of more men. And I think there's just like some problems that do sometimes arise kind of in kind of, again, individual interactions or kind of general pressures or expectations. But I would say generally though, like it's, again, it's like, you know, I think a little bit like what Rebecca was saying, like it does kind of exist and it does happen kind of, but depending on kind of the group or kind of the people that you're interacting with, it's really down to the individual basis, right? There can be actually, of course, incredibly supportive men and that are very aware and actually are very kind of very helpful. But then of course you can also have, you know, it's a spectrum. It's like individuals, right? It's like there are people who kind of can take kind of more aggressive or disparaging kind of perspectives, and then, you know, somewhere kind of in between. And I think navigating that is kind of, again, like to something Rebecca said earlier, having a good support network, kind of seeking out kind of situations where you do have support and like kind of which it definitely exists. So I think it's like in any kind of, it's like a random sampling of people. You might get unlucky or you might get lucky, but then kind of carving out and like kind of you do have the ability to shape your environment. It's not that the whole field is really just defined by the people in it, right? And I think that's also kind of evolving to be definitely more inclusive, and I think it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. Someone has also asked, like, besides a support network, do you have any other advice you might give to someone who might feel discouraged in like from stereotypes in computer science? Or
So sorry, what was the question again? So it's like
or any more advice for girls who might, or how would you say you got through moments where you felt like stereotypes were preventing you from continuing in like this field, or like moments when you face difficulties? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that the nice thing, well, is like if you do like the subject and you, I think, enjoy it, I think you can find, first of all, I think there are kind of separate things, like you can find people that are kind of going to be supporters on the support network side. But then I think there's also like lots of resources and kind of, you know, it's nice that we're not kind of even fixed kind of to our kind of geographical locations, right? There are like online communities like your guys's community, or like kind of other resources where there will actually be kind of clearly supportive environments. And I think that in terms of for me personally, if kind of there's disparaging or kind of weird things to interact with, ultimately comes down to like, if I enjoy what I'm doing, I can kind of just like kind of focus on that a little bit more. It's like kind of the other stuff is a little bit more noise kind of sometimes. And so if you kind of enjoy what you're doing well. It's like, I think I think those kind of noise kind of does pass, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also just working on building up your confidence, right? That's something that I definitely have struggled with over the years of like going through various phases of imposter syndrome. I do not have imposter syndrome anymore, I would say, in my current job, which I'm very happy about after a lot of time, in grad school of having, some amounts of imposter syndrome. But like, I think you get through that by focusing on your successes and saying, oh, I did this, I did that. Oh, maybe I am good at this field, right? And you get there. I think it just takes time. And it takes, resilience to like the small failures, because again, small failures do happen, and that's fine, and that's where you grow, but as long as like eventually you start, hitting that success, then you have something to point to where, if you have the naysayers, you can be like, no, wait a second, they're wrong. You don't have to necessarily, I mean, you can say that to them, but even if in the moment, like you're kind of just like, I don't even know what to do in this situation, like going back, to yourself on your own in your own time and saying, no, like they were wrong in what they said, like I am good at what I do. And I think that's just something that takes some time and experience to develop that level of confidence.
And we've got a couple more questions in the chat. Someone has asked, as a high school student, what are your suggestions on the activities that one can be interested in to learn more about research areas, or maybe how to get interested in research?
So I think this is like, it's complicated because it does depend on a little bit on like kind of the access to like kind of research kind of areas. So I think to start with, it's easier just to kind of think about, I think, breaking down what type of work or what type of subjects or research areas people are interested in. The complication there is that high school classes are not always a good representation of that kind of broader picture. So I would say that I think as a high school student, I think it's like, I know you guys might have a lot of pressure and stuff these days to already figure out what you need to do, but I think actually just building up some of these core skill sets in terms of, and then like, figuring out like kind of the types of things you like to do or don't like to do. And I think as a high school student, I think you don't need to do so much more than that, because really, honestly, when you get to college, there are way more kind of research opportunities or opportunities that open up. And so you have, like, at least at Rice, like, faculty are very happy in general to if they have space in their labs to work with undergraduate students. So I think it's much easier as an undergraduate to ask to like kind of work with somebody, or like kind of even just like say drop by their group meetings, or like kind of explore what research can be like, versus as a high school student, it's much harder, right? There's like many more barriers. And then once you're an undergraduate, they're actually even like, so what's known as REUs, so research experience for undergraduates. And so these are kind of systematic kind of programs that universities all around the country actually put up for students in the summers, where they can apply to and experience research. I think usually they're funded and you get a stipend. And so I'm just saying that, like, I think there's so many opportunities and that open up and are easier to access as a college student, that like, yes, you could explore some as a high school student, but it's like, I think it's much harder to see. You don't get as broad of a view. So I think building up some core skill sets that prepare you for kind of this type of exploration, I would say, is kind of more valuable, like, while you're in high school.
Yeah, I'll just say that I didn't even honestly know what research was when I was in high school. Like if you told me like research in high school, I thought that was like, the type of like synthesis paper where you go out and you like read a bunch of articles about something and then you kind of summarize them together. Like that's what it was, like a research paper, in my kind of like K-12 education. I didn't even know of this kind of definition of, it's like creating new original, ideas. And so like I had no idea what it was and didn't have any sense that I was even considering grad school until I got into college. So I just wanted to reiterate that it is completely okay to wait in that regard. If you happen to be like located near a university that is doing a lot of research, maybe you could find opportunities there to get involved now, although I will say, in my experience, at least here at Rice, it seems that most of my colleagues, we've got enough Rice undergrads who want to work with us that we do tend to prioritize them over, working with high schoolers, just because, they are at Rice, they are the ones who should be the first, recipients of those types of opportunities. But it is totally okay to wait. And, even in terms of picking a research subfield, I don't know how directly I said this in my introduction earlier on. I said that I started dabbling in education research on the side, and then I think I skipped right ahead to where that was my focus, but I didn't think I explicitly said that. I went into my PhD thinking I wanted to do computer systems. I did my master's on embedded systems. I did, the first couple of years of my PhD on virtualization systems, and then tossed it aside and went the CS education route in my third year of the program. So it's totally okay to wait and to figure that out along the way. You do not have to have it all figured out now.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure our listeners have benefited a lot from all of your advice. And I think we're running out of time, so that might be all the time we have for the questions right now. Specifically for our listeners, we'll be putting a link in the chat to join our server if you want to stay up to date with further STEM and Rose events, or chat with us. Carolyn, do you have any final words you'd like to say?
Dr. Schreib and Dr. Yao, thank you so much for spending time to be here with us and sharing about your path in STEM. And I'd also like to thank the audience for their attention, and yeah, everyone have a good weekend.
Thanks for having us. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
It was great to hear from y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, before you guys go, please join the server if you want to stay up to date with our events. We recently launched a hotline event or help desks. So if you have if you have homework questions or anything, you can pop in and we'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. But yeah, you guys can join for updates.